Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 6 of the Hot Path Show. I'm Johnny, joined by Tobias. Welcome in, Tobias. How you doing today?
I'm doing all good today. All good.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we got a very exciting episode of the Hot Path Show coming at you today. I'm going to be taking over for our main topic today. We're going to be showcasing a data-oriented combat system that I've used in a whole bunch of different projects. This kind of tags off of the previous main topic that I did, which was the data-oriented damage system. So this kind of builds off of that. You don't necessarily need to, have a complete understanding of everything that I talked about in that episode to follow along with this one. But just know that this kind of builds off of the concepts of that one, and everything basically integrates all nicely with that. So very excited for that. Anyways, we can get into some miscellaneous announcements because we have a whole bunch of stuff coming up this month. Maybe some of you have seen the video that I posted on my channel today about some of the things that we got going on. We're going to be talking about that in just a sec. But first, Tobias has a very exciting announcement. So Tobias, let the people know what's going on.
Yeah, so I'm finally releasing my game, my dot space game. Just read the instructions. Woo! I've been working on and off for it for 5 years, but a lot of like consulting and random side quests along the way. But it's finally coming out on 10th of April on Steam in early access. But the early access will be pretty meaty, so I think it will be very worth it.
Yeah. I know you've been working on it for quite a while, so yeah, it's very exciting to see. And then, so you can, feel free to talk about your game a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and just play the trailer here of your game while you go for that.
Yeah. So the game, as you see quickly here, is a lot of enemies, the red ones, things. And it's about you going into an AI-controlled matrix situation, and the AI inside of the simulation has gone rogue, and you need to go in and you need to follow the instruction coming from the outside, from AI experts communicating with you, and do a bunch of quests or instructions that will break the AI. Think of it like feeding ChatGPT with the magic tokens, which make it go crazy. So it's a surreal experience, very weird. But the main point is I'm using dots to be able to have thousands of enemies at the same time. So you have super powerful weapons and a lot of enemies, and it's just satisfying to just mold them down like cannon fodder. It's very satisfying. And I think it's going to be something very unique. There's a lot of stuff in this game which is just very, very strange and very, very out there, because I wanted to do something that didn't remind of anything else. So, yeah, just read instructions, 10th of April.
Awesome.
Put it on your wish list and make sure to check it out.
Yeah, I'm excited that you finally have a release date for it. And yeah, I know we've kind of been talking about it, back and forth for a little while. And I haven't actually gotten a chance to play it yet, so I'm very excited. I think I'll probably wait until your full release date, or your early access release date, I should say, until I check it out. But yeah, I'm very much looking forward to it.
I can add just a little bit of fun context for people, why I ended up with you on this stream and everything. Like one of the programmers at Stunlock, Rasmus, who has been on the showing off V-Rising a bunch of times. He showed me like Burst and ECS very, very early, like in the spring of 2019, I think. And he like, this is pretty cool. I didn't realize like the paralyzed, the SSE, like the SIMD things on the computer. The concept of SIMD and how Burst utilized it, and like you don't need to do even multi-parallel processing. You need to just shove it through this burst, and it will just fly like crazy. And then I started to experiment with a ton of enemies, and that's how Just Read Instruction came up, and that's how I fell in love with dots.
Awesome. Yeah, and very excited to have you on this episode specifically, because again, we're talking about the data-oriented combat system. So curious to see kind of how this combat system lines up a little bit with some of the ways that you've done some things. So that'll be very interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyways, I did put the link to the Steam page in the chat. It's also in the description of this video. Just look for Just Read the Instructions game, and it comes up on Steam pretty quickly. So yeah, very excited for that. So, anyways, let's get into the absolute litany of announcements that we have today. I did make a video that I posted on my YouTube and Twitter where it has just kind of like me kind of rapid firing through all these things. So I did just want to make a couple of announcements. So next week, Unity is going to be hosting a data-oriented design boot camp, which is going from March 5th to the 8th, and it's just for 1 hour a day. I think it's at like 8 or 9 a.m. Pacific time, something like that. And then from what I understand, they're going to be kind of like walking us through creating a full project using dots and ECS. So they're going to be going over the main concepts. It seems like kind of a good entry level for using Unity dots if you haven't, touched it at all before. And yeah, it sounds like there's going to be maybe some Q&A stuff along with that. So yeah, very interested to see how that goes. I think I'm going to be attending myself just to see kind of, what they go over and everything like that. Let me go ahead and drop a link for this in the chat. But again, you can find this pretty easily if you just search for Unity Dots Bootcamp. And yeah, it's just the official one put on by Unity. So yeah, very much looking forward to that. And then, so that ends on the 8th. And then starting on the 8th, we're going to be kicking off the first Unity Dots Community Challenge that I'm going to be hosting. I'm not announcing the challenge until the challenge starts, which is going to be the next episode of the Hot Path Show on March 8th. So basically at the beginning of the show, I'm going to be giving some details about what the challenge is and everything like that. You can sign up for this over on itch.io. Let me go ahead and get a link for this. We have all kinds of links here today. So yeah, then I think it's going to be a good way, again, to get yourself involved a little bit more in dots, especially if you haven't really, completed a full project or anything yet, and you want to maybe push yourself a little bit further. I think you're going to be, in the right place to complete this challenge. Same thing if you, have a ton of dots experience. I think this challenge is going to still provide enough depth for you to do some interesting things and, solve the problem in some kind of unorthodox ways to see if you can, really get the most performance out of it. So that's going to be very exciting. Now, the next thing after that is something that I've been kind of talking about for a while is my big netcode for entities tutorial, where I'm going to be showing you how to make a full MOBA game using Unity's netcode for entities. So that finally has a release date of March 15th. I know I said that I was going to have it out in February. I have the kind of core tutorial done, but I still want to add some better kind of like theory sections where I'm just kind of explaining the main concepts of netcode and how everything works a little bit better. So gonna be taking some good time to do that. And then it's going to be on March 15th. By the way, I think the runtime of that is going to be right around the 6-hour mark for that full course. So a lot of good info in there. A very dense 6 hours, if I do say so myself.
Very much looking forward to this.
Yeah, and especially because your game is a networked multiplayer game, but you're not using netcode for entities. You're using your own custom networking stack. So will be very interesting to see kind of the comparison between what you've done versus what Unity has implemented for us. So anyways, then on the March 15th episode of the Hot Path Show, it's going to be kind of dedicated to netcode for entities, where I'm going to be doing just kind of like a high level overview of the project, showing you everything that we're going to be completing in the tutorial, and then kind of like diving into some of the main systems and showing you how like some of the main netcode concepts work. So you can maybe get an idea about, just how netcode for entities works before diving into the full tutorial. And I do just kind of want to speak a little bit candidly about my experiences using netcode for entities, the things I like about it, the things that I don't like about it so much. And so, yeah. And then maybe, Tobias, if you're around that day, then maybe we can have you on for that one. And that would be a good one to chat about things with.
I would love to. Sounds like a good idea.
Sweet. So, so then the final episode of the Hot Path Show for the month of March, we're going to be... Actually, I skipped something. Oh my goodness. There's so much going on in March. So the week after the netcode for entities tutorial goes up is GDC, the Game Developers Conference, which is taking place in person in San Francisco. The last episode, Tobias and I did talk about kind of Unity's plan for GDC and everything like that. So you can either, find that previous episode or subscribe to the Hot Path Show Clips channel, where I've posted just that specific clip about, Unity's GDC plans for this year. We're kind of do like a preview of some of the talks they have and stuff like that. So they're doing like a kind of like developer summit day. So the first 2 days of GDC, they have like a whole bunch of talks about upcoming features to their game engine. There is kind of one main roadmap talk at the beginning, which, maybe we see some announcements on dots there, maybe not. And then there is a specific 30-minute long talk on dots baking. So that would be very interesting. And I know GDC is kind of a tough event for a lot of people to get to, just, due to the travel and, lodging prices and everything like that. So if you're not able to make it to GDC, don't worry, because on March 22nd, which is that Friday, last day of GDC, we're going to be doing a GDC special episode of the Hot Path Show, where I'm just going to be kind of talking about all the main announcements that came out at GDC. And just kind of sharing them all with you and thoughts. So that episode is basically going to be dedicated to GDC. Now, the last episode of March for the Hot Path Show is we're going to be revisiting the DOS challenge that I'm going to be announcing. So kind of just going into, I plan on participating in the challenge myself. So just kind of like going into my submission and, some of the decisions that I made and everything like that, as well as I do want to go through a bunch of the submissions in the community and just kind of like highlight some interesting ways that people solved problems in there. So I think that's going to be a fun one. So anyways, that's the month of March, which is going to be absolutely jam-packed. What do you think of that, Tobias?
It sounds like a jam-packed month. There's a lot of stuff there that I've been looking forward to, so I'm excited to just enjoy most of it.
Yeah. That comes together a lot. Oh, and I do see. So there also seems to be another small talk that may include dots. It goes over the Mega City demo. Okay, I may have to revisit that. I wonder if it's the. I think there's maybe like a multiplayer specific talk. There might be some dots multiplayer stuff on there as well. But either way, I mean, I'm going to be in attendance at GDC, so. Anything dots related that I come across, I'm happy to share it with you. So yeah, here it is, Unity Developer Summit, Multiplayer Development 101, our Mega City Metro sample. Yep. Yeah. Forgot about that one. That's definitely probably going to have some dots related things in there. So exciting one nonetheless. Okay. So anyways, if you are, as excited about data-oriented design as we are, then maybe you might want to support us over on Patreon, because we have even more bonuses for people who, really want to get a lot of, all the data-oriented design content that they can get. So I do have a couple of recent bonus episodes. A couple weeks ago, I put up a video about how I would make Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 in Unity Dots. That's available to patrons at all levels. And then just last week, actually this week, time is such a construct right now. I just put up the first Q&A episode for patrons at the L1 cash tier and up. So we only had one submission for the Q&A, but it was a really good question. We talked about kind of implementing a floating point origin system in Unity ECS. So I talked about that for about like 15 minutes, just kind of maybe some of like the considerations that you need to make, and kind of explaining the problem a little bit for people who may not be familiar. And then the second half of the episode, I kind of just wanted to do something a little bit fun where people can kind of get to know me a little bit better. So I literally just went on ChatGPT and typed in, what are some good questions to ask on a first date? And then I answered just a bunch of those in there.
Why not?
So again, I think it's just like kind of that's kind of what I want for these Q&A episodes, is maybe we can talk about some, technical stuff, as well as just kind of some, other fun topics that, I can speak on that wouldn't make sense to talk about like on, the Hot Path Show or on the YouTube channel or anything like that. So anyways, lots of cool stuff happening over on Patreon. And of course, we'll be, posting our monthly bonus episodes. You can also get the show in podcast form, as well as see our internal show notes to help you just kind of, quickly review everything that we talked about in these episodes. So anyways, with all that stuff out of the way, let's actually go ahead and get into some topics here. So we can start with the prefetch, which is our warm-up topic of the week. Now, the one thing that I did want to talk about is, pulling it up here. I don't know if you saw this. This was kind of making the rounds a little bit. This Unity China editor. Did you see anything on this at all?
No, and it didn't load much when I saw the link.
Yeah, so the link that I put you like actually brings you to like the Unity China website. So I don't know if there's some like, country blocking or something that you have going on there. Oh, and I hope that just didn't. Yeah, we got to retranslate this page here. So, anyways, Unity has kind of had like a China branch for a couple of years now. It's kind of an interesting situation because I don't think it's necessarily like owned by Unity Global. They're kind of like a partnership. They're kind of like, they're not necessarily like under the same Unity umbrella, but they're still, branded as Unity. They have the Unity editor, which is, pretty much the same Unity editor that we have over here. However, some people actually kind of notice that this Unity China version has a bunch of like additional features that, people over here might want to have. So this kind of blog post here really goes into a lot of the main things. I'd also recommend checking out Mike Game from Scratch, his video, just kind of like going over some of the things on here. But there does seem to be kind of like competitors to Unreal's Nanite and Lumen, where they kind of have like, we're kind of going through this presentation here. And let me see, get to the actual points. Yeah, so there's this thing called a virtual geometry. So this seems to be kind of like a competitor to Nanite, where it's basically you can have these like extremely high poly count models, and it kind of does almost like the like level of detail stuff completely automatic for you. So this is kind of like, you can see this kind of happening here a little bit. So then it's I don't really understand like all the details of like how exactly it works. But yeah, it's basically like a competitor to Nanite. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I had no idea. That's very fascinating.
Yeah. So this is not available in, the, I guess you could call it the Western version of Unity. I don't know if there's just regular Unity, vanilla Unity. So they've kind of added in this, as well as a type of global illumination, which is supposed to, kind of compete with something like Lumen from the Unreal side. Now, I wanted to bring this up primarily because they do also have some dots improvements as well. So I'll just go ahead and read off this full paragraph here, and you can kind of tell me what you think about it. Just keep in mind that this has just been, translated with the just built-in browser translation. So, it may not be the most accurate, but so anyways, it says, as for dots, we are very much in favor of Unity's exploration in this direction, so we will continue to support the current solution. However, the current solution lacks ease of use and flexibility. As a simple example, if you have used dots, you will find that the archetype architecture has shortcomings in dynamic updates. Therefore, we will continue to support the current dots and design and implement the Chinese ECS architecture to make up for its shortcomings in ease of use and flexibility. For example, we're exploring the convergence of archetype and sparse set technologies to provide efficient data access and the flexibility to upgrade dynamically. At the same time, we will develop the particle system of the Chinese version of the engine based on the new architecture to verify effectiveness of the design, and after successful verification, it will be used as the core component, and the architecture will support the underlying system of more engines in the future. So, a lot to unpack there.
That's spicy.
Yeah. So, I guess we can just kind of break this down like point by point. So, first of all, I think it's cool that they mention, they're very much in favor of Unity's exploration in the data-oriented design, direction. Yeah. And they say, they want to continue the support of the current solution. Now, they do say the current solution lacks ease of use and flexibility. I would kind of agree with that. I think it's sort of funny that they're just being like, straight up and,
Stu-
open about this in like an official kind of capacity here.
Yeah.
Were you going to say something?
No, I was just yeah. I think it's more tooling than the underlying architecture, but sure, yeah, it lacks flexibility. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, as far as ease of use, there's definitely kind of like a learning curve as far as getting things up and running. Actually, I guess as far as flexibility goes, I'm not sure exactly what they mean by flexibility, but I think some of the things that maybe I'm going to be showcasing later today, I think kind of is actually a good example of how the ECS design pattern actually does give you lots of flexibility. So
Mhm.
it would be interesting to see kind of what they meant by that. But then they kind of go into an example. They say, if you've ever used dots, you'll find that the archetype architecture has shortcomings in dynamic updates. I'm not sure exactly
I,
what they mean by this. Do you have any kind of ideas?
I would think that one of the big bottlenecks in dots is structural changes, and you need to like some deal with that probably to have a to have dynamic stuff happening where data evolve, or I don't know. It's hard to explain, but anytime you want to move something into a different to remove or add components, you get a slight
Right.
hit to the performance, and maybe that's what they are doing. But that's enable disable components feature. What that is for. So
Right.
I,
Right.
I I get that point, but I don't think it's like that big of a deal. Maybe I don't know. My game
Yeah.
works just fine with some structural changes. It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, structural changes, you're not going to, completely avoid them, but there are definitely ways that you can kind of optimize around them where, maybe you don't use them at all, or, for certain things where I guess I should say, you could find ways to avoid using them in situations that maybe you're using them quite frequently, in favor of other things. But again, there's kind of always a bit of a performance trade off that you got to balance there.
Yeah, but that's the word, the trade-off. That's the word. So if you add some way of dealing with it without structural changes, you're probably gonna have some other trade-off where another part of the engine will become slightly slower because it has to deal with more complexity. So I don't know. I get their point, but I would want to see where they're going with it before I can judge fully if there's a good idea.
Right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So yeah, they say, therefore, we'll continue to support current DOS design and implement the Chinese ECS architecture to make up for the shortcomings of ease of use and flexibility. And then they give an example about exploring the convergence of the archetype and sparse set technologies to provide efficient data access and the flexibility to update dynamically. So again, it would be nice if we got kind of maybe a little bit more of a concrete example about how they're trying to do this, about what exactly this means.
I
But yeah,
I I just want to add that I think the translation is probably in the most the thing that's throwing us off here, because I think when they say sparse technologies, they're probably talking about some kind of a way where you don't pack everything perfectly together index wise, but you're having like, oh, this we have a big chunk or whatever, or where you just have a few components thrown in and they are mapping to something not totally one to one, sparse mapping instead of
right. Yeah.
yeah.
Basically,
It
kind of
sounds like
optimizing for cache hits, you mean,
wait,
kind of
wait,
thing, like just kind of, or
maybe it's optimizing for being able to swap in and out components easier by not having, because you need to move it to another chunk if you add or remove components in the current ECS solution, right? But if you had some sort of like, oh, these components are defined as sparse or whatever, maybe you can have like, oh, these components live in their own chunk or own thing, and if you want to add them to an entity, then you just add that component instance into its separate chunk where they all belong, and they are like sparsely allocated because there's just like a few entities scattered around the system which own that particular component. So all of those components are just shoved into a specific point, but it's not that word. Sorry, not continuous.
contiguous. Contiguous.
Yeah, contiguous. It's not contiguous. It's just like basically just pointers into a chunk of of this specific component. So the components in its context are sparsely mapped back to random entities, and that way you can maybe remove and add components freely without having to move out entities out of chunks, because you can, we have a specific chunk, a specific component which do not live in the chunk itself. It lives outside, so it's sparsely allocated towards spread out entities, whoever needs to have one of these components. And maybe that's what they are talking about, sparse, because there's a slight architectural change, difference between sparsely allocated stuff versus contiguous allocated stuff. I don't know. My brain just went
Yeah.
all the way to there. Maybe there's something like that going on, because that would make sense in my mind at least.
Yeah. And so we do get a comment here saying, yeah, it's like component aspects, but on a chunk level.
Oh yeah, that could,
So
okay,
that could be interesting as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So moving on, where were we? So at the same time, so this is interesting. At the same time, we'll develop the particle system of the Chinese version of the engine based on the new architecture to verify effectiveness of the design. And, they're going to do some verification and then use that as a core component of the architecture going forward. So kind of interesting that they're taking, specifically the particle system, and they want to kind of, build that off of an ECS back end to kind of, verify that, these changes are actually going to have a nice performance benefit. And then, if it is, then they'll kind of use that as the underlying for more of the, engine features in the future. So, I mean, I definitely think it's a good idea to, try out and verify the proposed changes in an actual real world setting. And yeah, it seems like the particle system is going to be like a good place to start for that.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's that's like, let's make an engine on this unverified. Let's make a game on this verified engine. It's like the same sort of a deal. Let's make implement a tricky concept, particle system on this technology that we were developing, to make sure that the underlying technology is a good idea. So yeah, perfect. Yeah, good idea.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that is kind of one of the things that like regular Unity wants to do, is they want to, have an ECS architecture kind of be the back end of a lot of just core regular Unity features that, we may not know, that ECS is kind of happening under the hood, but we just kind of still get the performance benefits from it. So it seems like they're like kind of going towards like a same end goal, but maybe the way that they're, specific ways that they're going about it might be different. So it is interesting to see that there are kind of these two verticals of dots almost being kind of worked on in parallel for different kind of air quotes versions of the Unity editor. So it would be interesting to see if there ends up being kind of some cross-pollination where, the Unity China version starts kind of affecting the, main regular Unity version and vice versa.
Yeah, I expect this to be not as fleshed out as the dots we are used to, but it's always, that's how you get the innovation. You have somebody else to like, well, I have a different idea, let's try this, and then you can take the good stuff from both.
Well, I think my interpretation of it is that it's kind of like built off of what like regular Unity dots is right now, but they're kind of trying their own, changes to the package to, affect some of the underlying technologies about how it works and everything.
Yeah. Always good to try around, and yeah, I'm very excited to see what. How did you find this? I'm very curious.
Well, so yeah, this was kind of like making the rounds on Twitter. I've actually like known about this Unity China version for a while. Just kind of like being part of like the Unity's Insiders program, they let us know about some kind of like upcoming changes. And I think I was just like maybe paying attention to the blog around that time, and they had kind of announced this partnership, I think back in like August of 2022. So almost like 2 years ago. And I actually had worked on a client project a while back where they were using a China specific version of the editor, but it was before this kind of like separate partnership. So it was still like basically the same version of the Unity editor, but I think there was like some slight difference in like, how like the Unity editor is like, 2022.1.1 F1. Like I think it was like a like .cn1 or something like that.
Okay.
But it was like
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
same version of the editor. Like I still used the regular Unity to work on the project, and like the code compiled exactly the same and everything. But yeah, I think someone like just a couple days ago kind of like posted this on Twitter because they saw that, Unity China put out this whole post and they're saying like, oh, we have this new version of the editor that includes, global illumination and this crazy like, automatic LOD type stuff.
Yeah.
And so yeah, then it kind of got people digging into some of the stuff that was going on there. But
All right. Makes
yeah.
sense. Well,
So we got
let's
Danny in the
hope it's.
chat saying he's enjoying your
Yeah,
lighting.
I don't know. I
Is that an LED light?
No, it's like a halogen light, if
Oh,
that's
okay.
the word you use. It feels like yeah, it's probably because it's just not bright enough. So my webcam is like finding the right update rate to get me bright enough.
Gotcha.
And if I had it brighter, it would probably be fine. But yeah, I think I will have to have it like this. I don't know.
Yeah, at
Yeah,
least you're
I
not
hope
just
it's
like in like
fine.
a dark room against like the brick wall. Like, are you kidnapped right now?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Do I have you
Uh,
locked in my basement?
yeah, it's well, it's a brick wall, but we're not in a basement. At least this
Yeah.
is
No, I was gonna say it
first
looks
first
good.
floor. Yeah,
So yeah, this is an interesting one. I don't see how the particle system would involve lots of structural changes that could be validated against the different architecture. Yeah, that is a good point, right?
yeah,
I mean, I was kind
yeah.
of
I
thinking that as I
very
was
much
reading
agree.
it. It's like what kind of like major structural changes would you have in a particle system, right?
Yeah, I think like validating a tech like this through a particle system is a good idea, but specifically the dynamic thing that they were complaining
The
about
things that they
needing to
were, yeah,
be.
specifically saying, yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't really matter for a particle system, just as wine games. I don't know how to pronounce it.
I think he says
WAYN.
Wayne. I think he says
Wayne
Wayne.
game. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. I just remember now when you said it. Yeah, good point. I don't think that really matters. So we'll see what happens. Maybe they have a new, very very innovative way to do the particle system, which requires a lot of dynamic changes. Who knows?
And then, yeah, so Danny, of course, is one of the developers in Unity Dots under the regular version of Unity Dots. So interested that he was surprised to learn about the different Dots version as well. So yeah, sounds like this has been completely developed, on their own with sounds like pretty much no contact from Unity, unless like they had been in contact with some of like maybe Danny's managers or something like that, but. Yeah, it seems
Yeah.
like they're just kind of going rogue on their own.
Yeah. Well, why not? All right.
So Luke
Yeah.
says there are multiple ECS implementations. Unity uses archetypes, dense slash table based. There's also sparse set, bit set based, and relative ECS. Okay, interesting. So yeah, that maybe they could be trying out like a completely different version, a
Yeah.
different way of doing ECS.
I bet sparse set is just like not making it contiguous, and because that has very nice performance benefits when you have very uniform type of objects just on the straight straight arrays. But when you have very, very complex and swapping around, then maybe not having that contiguous memory to deal with is a better idea. I don't know. I never thought about it too hard, but it sounds like a fair trade-off for a specific type of game that needs it.
Right. And maybe even like, what if Unity China comes up with their own kind of version of ECS and that's different than the existing version of ECS. And there's maybe almost, ways that you could choose which implementation you want to use for specific situations because, maybe, one implementation would work better performance wise for, doing certain types of things, whereas the other implementation will work better for other things.
Yeah, there's a lot of comments now that I almost want to like star all of them, but like
A lot of good stuff here.
yeah, a sparse based ECS stores each component in its own sparse set, which has the entity ID as key. Sparse set implements allow for fast add and remove operations. Yeah, that seems like a trade-off that you would want sometimes. Yeah.
And then,
yeah, you can take the next one.
Danny says, I do see a way that it would require many dynamic changes. If the particles aren't pooled, then spawning and destroying them would already be a structural change. That's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, that's fair.
I suppose for something like that, you probably would want some type of pooling, right?
Yeah. As always with programming, there's a million ways to solve an issue. So I guess there's like a lot of ways to like frame the problem. Yeah.
Exactly. What else do we got going on here? So it's like the original ECS of Thief, where systems had their own components and lists, and entities would be a group of indices into these different lists. I think that's kind of what he's guiding at with the sparse set.
Okay.
And Luke says, I think Unity uses a combination. They use archetype, but also enableable component seems like bit set based to me. Yeah, and the enableable components, that wasn't an initial feature of Unity ECS either. So that was something kind of like added in later down the line. So going off of that, maybe we do see more types of ECS implementations later on.
But that's a perfect like trade-off situation where like, if you have the enableable component with the bit set thing, and you have the 128 limit, I think, because you have 128 bits, then you're like, you sacrifice some space for the possibly disabled irrelevant components in the chunk. You sacrifice some memory for not having to move them around back and forth to chunks with or without the component. So it's like that's for me. It's like, well, potato. I don't know. Depends on the game which one would be the most efficient solution for any type of problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, it's kind of like an opt-in type thing. Although the only unfortunate thing is that 128 entity limit is not an opt-in thing. So even if you're not using enableable components, you're still hard capped at 128 entities per chunk.
But when you get into a big complex game, there are very few entities where actually a chunk is where a single entity is so small that it will fit. It very gets out of hand quickly, so it's kind of fine with 128.
And I think even a couple weeks ago when I was showing like the transform system deep dive one, I was just doing a little bit of basic math, and even with like just the transform components and local to world components, like you only have, I think, maybe like 64 bytes of extra data before you start getting under that 128 entity limit. So you get there pretty quickly. By the way, Unity Bootcamp, that's happening next week, that Unity's putting on. That's the 5th to the 8th. And so you can just sign up on their site for that. Okay, so we can go ahead and move into our next section here, which is the cache hit, Unity Dots quick tip of the week. So you're taking over the cache hit this week. So
spotlight is on me.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Let me see here. So this is very much just stuff that I probably a lot of people will know most of these things, but for me it was just I wish I knew all of these details when I started my game, so I just throw them onto screen and see if it helps anybody. So yeah, Unity mathematics, Unity.mathematics, which is a very nice library, which most of us use who use dots. So for those who doesn't know, like it's inspired by how well, and maybe I'm a little bit wrong on the data set, but the way I've understood it is it's very much inspired by how the GPU handles math, where you can have go very wide with a lot of math operations at the same time through SIMD, single instruction multiple data. But that's not the part which I'm fascinated by or want to show off. I just want to show off a few things that I thought would helps me in my everyday development.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, so first of all, here we have just a few. I already spoiled half of it. I feel like just sharing my screen here, but we have a few variables here: 2D float 2, float 3, float 4, just random values. And this thing took me a while before I found. So this is hidden. So if you maybe this changed, I haven't actually looked, but I think it's hidden. Yeah, if you have this, normal browsing thing, you won't find them. It's like specifically put in a way so it's like not part of the documentation. I think it's like editor browser state never, so it doesn't show when you're scrolling through the different things. But that's very nice to have. So you have a get and set method where you can access just specific subparts of a vector like this. So I use this all the time. Mostly use this the other way around, like that, right? I'm like, oh, I have something where a 3D game where it's like, well, the y-axis doesn't matter. You're like
Right. Yeah,
in
yeah.
an area and you want to do something, so only the x and z value that matters. So maybe like that. And you want to pick it up and you want to make some pathfinding around it, something that only makes sense really in 2 dimensions, or well, you only need 2 dimensions, then you should use that. And it works with almost all sorts of combination. If you look through the source code, it's like oh well, now for some reason it's like a billion of these
Yeah.
different
Yeah,
combination
all
of
the
everything.
different combinations of and you can do like you can see down at the bottom there's ZXXX for like those specific cases if
Yeah,
you wanted to.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it both set and get, which is very nice. So you can play around, and it's just mainly like I call it syntax sugar. It's like you can do it
Yeah, yeah,
easily
totally.
without this, but it's just nice to have. And then also this one, and I will explain why it really matters to me a lot. But this index thing, I don't know if I can do F12 and go into the definition. I don't know, maybe not. Anyway, so this is a float 4, and you can just index, and this will be XYZ. Oh, wrong, wrong order. Z comes first before W. Sorry about that. Like that.
That's not how I learned
So
the
you can,
alphabet.
yeah. Well, so yeah, you can just index into this, and this works obviously all the way down to float 2, and it's for me. So Johnny, can you guess why this is very relevant to just read instructions?
Indexing into like a float
This
4 like that.
particular index thing.
Do you like store multiple floats in like one float 4?
Well, I have a lot of balancing data, which is structured around 1, 2, 3, or 4 players.
Oh, okay. So you
So
have one float 4
just
that represents everybody's stats, and then you can just key into that for player 1, 2, 3, 4.
well, I can key into that depending on how many players are playing.
Okay.
So it's like player count, and then like, oh, how many enemies should
Oh,
spawn?
oh, I see. I see. I see. I see.
Yeah, so that's very very convenient for me, and I didn't know that. I didn't realize that for like the first 2 years of development somehow. And then I discovered this index, which is, when you see the I think we can actually, like, this is like, let's see here, can we do that? I don't know why my this isn't it like that. No, is it like that? I don't know why I don't see any there.
Yeah.
It show any highlighting colors for some reason, but like they have this. They just do the casting the over to the pointer and then just going into the pointer. It's almost impossible to see when everything is white for some reason. But they don't even do a switch case statement, which is nice. It's very fast. But anyway, like, this just makes it very very nice, and I didn't realize it, and it's just very easy to like get access. And there's plenty of times where a full float four with four values are, enough to deal with the problem ahead at hand, and you can just index to it and find whatever you need. And yeah, it's just very nice to me to use that one.
Sweet.
So yeah, and I didn't know. I never worked enough with that type of a math library, so never even thought about this indexing thing before. Yeah. And then the last one, which is just me being what I need. So when I go through 3D to 2D and back, and pathfinding, or oh, I need to play something, and then I need to find the 3D position, and the Y doesn't really matter. Then I have this extension method. Oh, it's found. Yeah, yeah. So I have, two 3D XZ, and then I put in flow 2 with the X into X and Y into Z. So again, the Y is not really the end. Y is not really the relevant part, because it's like,
Right. Yeah.
just an area. But then I have, the Y as an optional thing, and just
Yeah.
tip
I like
to
how you have
just do
that
one
as
of
like
those.
the default case with 0 there. So if you don't need to pass
Yes,
anything in,
exactly.
then you can just convert 3D to 2D, and yeah.
Yeah, and this thing, flow 2, and then just straight up dot, and my own version. That's, this thing, which most people know, but maybe somebody like, oh, I didn't know that. If you do this, it becomes an extension method onto this type. So yeah,
Yep. And
just
that's just
Google
a
that. If
regular C# language feature. So
Yeah,
that's yeah.
nothing special to dots or anything like that, but just a nice thing. And then those two, just, well, I don't know, maybe people think this is just water under bridges. Probably is, but in math F, in the old, in Unity engine, the old
Right.
version, you had like
Everything
the
was
a multiplication with like, oh, deg to rad, or rad to deg,
yeah,
and
yeah,
and
yeah,
and it was just not as nice and tidy as this is. So use radians and degrees to convert back and forth. It's much easier. Yeah. And then safe. Uh, I
Normalized
usually
safe, yeah.
don't use the safe one, because I'm like, if the safe one,
Oh,
what?
I'm just messing with you.
Okay. No, but like, this is like a fascinating philosophical problem. Like, if you have the safe, well, first to explain, safe mean, I'll put it in here just so it's very easy to see. It means like, if it's zero, 000 vector, you can't find a normalized version of it, so then it will become none and not a number.
Right.
But the safe one handles that case. Otherwise, you will just, you will cascade none, not a number values through your whole system, and it will just break everything. And safe will, stop that. But, and this is, maybe you have a different idea, but for me, it's like, if I can't find a reason why this would be zero, I don't put in safe, because I want to have the actual problem show up when it happens. I'm like, if it becomes zero, my game should break. Sort of. I should fix it, because it should never become zero. Do you do the
Yeah.
same?
Well, so yeah, I was just gonna say, I think I've kind of like gone through like an evolution where, like, when I started kind of programming and doing things, like, yeah, I was just like doing whatever I knew how to do, and of course I was getting errors thrown and all that. And as I started to maybe like learn a little bit more about programming, then I say, oh, okay, I can do all these cool things that like, handle all these cases where if I put in incorrect data, then it like, handles it behind the scenes and I don't get an error and don't have to worry about that. But then, as I got past that, then I started to realize like, no, it's actually like kind of a good idea to have errors in a lot of these cases because, you know, if there's an error, then that's like, you know, a potentially some issue with my program that is like happening
Yeah.
behind the scenes that I have no insight on at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there are, again, some cases where it's like, yeah, I don't really care if, the case of the normalized safe, as long as I kind of like understand what the difference between regular normalized and normalized safe is. And I know for my program that, maybe there is a potential that a zero gets passed in, but I'm okay with the output result of that because I understand, the output result of that.
Yeah. It's like the more you dig into these kind of things, the more it becomes philosophical. And you're like, well, I don't. Well, it depends on what you're expecting and how you think about what's actually a problem and what's not a problem and all of that. It becomes like a kind of a deep thing. I remember in the beginning when I was working on Unity back in like 2013 or something, and I like put like on every get component not equal to null, and just I'm gonna handle if there's no component on the game of it, and
Yeah.
it's just
Add a component behind the scenes, but then like it gets like added with like values that are like complete garbage anyways. So then you have
yeah
another problem now.
yeah I've learned that like make sure to get all the like the 95% of all the issues. It should just like stop you in your tracks. That's the way I used it, because if it's a problem, you need to deal with it properly right away. So I'm all for letting. That's why I very rarely use normalized safe, because there's very rarely a situation where normalization should take in a zero vector in my type of code anyway. So, but it's good to know that like well, I don't know, if you just work with math library and you like just put in math.norm, you will see that it's both of them, so it's pretty easy to discover these
Right,
nuanced
right.
functions. But I just thought, and then also normal up, down, right, left, like I use them, and that's mostly because I want to be able to like see clearly and not having to write it like
Yeah, new
new
vector or float three
yeah,
zero one zero.
just for readability. I expect it to be identical in the compilation,
Yeah,
after the
yeah.
compilation, to new vectors, but I don't really know. I just use them. And then this one, I'm not really sure. And if somebody in chat have like a magic solution to this, I would love to know it. So there's an often situation where I have, what I should. Well, it doesn't really matter. Maybe this one should be normalized. It's a direction, so maybe it's conceptually normalized. Imagine this is normalized, whatever. Um, so when I have a direction and I want to convert it to a quaternion, and I don't really care what's up or down. It's just like forward is what's relevant to me. I've not found a way to do it safely without
Well,
just.
so I think there is a look rotation safe.
But that's for, and might be wrong here. We can look it up. I think that's for not normalized values.
Okay.
Let me probably Danny screaming
Yeah.
in this chat.
Well, yeah, while you're looking
Um,
at that, we can kind of explain the problem. So when you are doing like a direction to rotation where you want to have, say, one object look at another object, you can do the quaternion.look rotation to basically say, look at that entity, around the whichever axis that you pass in. But if the look rotation is the same as your reference axis, then it doesn't know how to rotate it properly.
yeah, if the forward axis is the same as the up axis, it can't find an up because both of them are the same. So, but let's see, it returns a method look rotation returns a quaternion view rotation given a unit length forward vector and a unit length up vector. So I think the look rotation safe refers to non-normalized float direction
Okay.
values. And unless I am just reading the documentation wrong here. Let me get back to the stream window. Yeah. Has Danny said anything?
No.
I don't know. Oh, ITR is saying he might have had a, or maybe that he's not talking about this thing, or maybe it's, I don't know. But if you don't, well, if you go back to this, irrelevant of the safe or not, I think, well, it can't be that the safe fixes this because it's undefined. If your direction is up and you're trying to create a quaternion with the forward up and up, then it just doesn't know what to do about it. So it has to be an undefined result. So this is the only way I figured out how to do it. So you need to define an up and then make sure that your defined up is not the same as the direction forward that you're trying to make the quaternion out of. It's not the same. If it's the same, then just swap it for another reference direction, right? And then you construct the look rotation. And for me, it's just very, very strange to have a branching if statement straight in the middle of like kind of high optimized math code. But I have no idea how to do this in a safe manner without this if statement.
So yeah, I'm actually looking up what it says in the source right now. I do see someone also posted in the chat, but it says if the magnitude of the vectors is so extreme that the calculation cannot be carried out reliably, or the vectors are collinear, which is the case that we're basically trying to solve right here, then it says the identity will be returned instead. So it doesn't actually change the vector like you're doing. It just returns the identity, which is just basically a zero rotation.
Which is basically undefined. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. Our dog is like having dreams and like halfway barking. Does it come through the mic?
We're getting a little bit of that.
Yeah, that's Felix having chasing rabbits in his dreams. Sorry about that.
Shout out Felix.
Yes. All right. As long as you hear me clearly, I think it will probably be fine.
Yeah. You're good.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So yeah. But anyway, I think we're just stuck on this problem still. Then, like, you need to check so your forward is not the same as your up, because then you're screwed and you will get identity back, and that's not what you're after. So, I guess since the chat has not given anything cool response, I guess I'm stuck with an if statement.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's how I do it.
Works.
And then, well, I don't know, distance square comparison. I don't know, maybe that's a little bit too basic for people to care about. What do you think?
Worth a mention, but I think I saw, I think maybe Taro Dev did like an actual performance comparison on because you're saying do a distance squared comparison versus a regular distance comparison, do you mean?
Yeah. Just when you're comparing two numbers, you don't have to do the whole distance, and distance squared is one less square operation, which is in the context of if you're having cache misses, is that optimization is irrelevant. But when you're actually in like a very, very high performant hot path in dots, this actually makes sense. For me, in one of the, like, I have up to 4,000 enemies at the same time in just read instructions, and I have a bunch of situations where I do distance checks, and in that case, when it's very, very tightly packed and nicely laid out memory with 4,000 enemies, distance versus distance squared actually makes a marginal change, like a few percentage change for me.
Well, good to know that you actually have concrete results from that, because I guess I was kind of I think I had seen some people like do that kind of performance comparison on their own, but that was just kind of like in regular Unity, and it didn't make much of a difference. So I was kind of always under the assumption that like the compiler just kind of automatically did that.
Yeah, I think Mike Acton in his famous 2013 data-oriented talk does like say like, oh, I maybe sinus and cosinus is the comparing, but I think square root is something like 28, 38 cycles on the CPU, and
Right.
a cache miss is 200. So it's like if you miss the
Yeah.
cache,
So
it's
yeah, that
completely
makes sense.
irrelevant what
Yeah.
math function you do use. Yeah. So, but anyway, if you need the actual distance, then you should use distance. But if you're just comparing something, then you can just compare to distance squared, and you will save a square. But yeah, I think that's more basic for most people who work in dots. The last thing, which also might be, well, I think is pretty cool, is instead of using straight up random, because random is tricky with multi-threading, because if you assign a random seed to different threads, hopefully you will get a good actual spread. If you're like, oh, this random had this seed on this thread, and this random has this seed on this thread, but it's not really that simple to do that sometimes in dots, because they like hide the threading behind nice code with the job system. So what I do most of the time in just read instructions, where I have a lot of random seeding for all different sort of things, I use noise instead of random. Well, it's a random seed somewhere in the behind, but I don't use the actual mathematics dot random. I use noise instead. So I have a seed, and then I have a thread index, and then maybe I also put in the entity index or something like that, and you get out a flow2 or something like that. And there's like a bunch of there's a bunch of different noise versions, and well, we'll get a throwback to this later when we go through the dynamic allocation thing, and I will share a link that's very useful. But the noise thing, explore that. That's way for people who are used to like Unity engine.random. Noise is in a lot of cases just as fine to produce variations in your gameplay.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's a
Yeah.
good tip.
So yeah,
That's not one
that's
that that's not one that I've used too much, but I like it a lot.
yeah, it's like all basically everything that's random and a bunch of ingested instructions are noise, not random.
That's a cool way to approach that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
Noise is
Cash
awesome.
hit. Oh, so I don't know how to pronounce that. Tuma didn't know noise existed. Yes, noise exists. You should use it, and yeah, keep the same channel on, and I will talk to you, I will show some other things in the end about this also. Onto them. Well, cliffhanger. Sorry about that, but
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know, keep your
I'm looking
we need to
forward to
keep the
it.
program going.
Sweet. All right. And so if that's all you got for the cache hit, we can move over to our context switch here. And I will pull up what we have here for our context switch because we have a new Unity version, Unity entity version. Just saw this last night. I haven't had a chance to play around with it myself, but we got a new 1.2.0-pre.12 version. So got a little bit of a fake out because the previous version was this -pre.6 and it said promotion preparation. So it seemed, at least to me, that like the next version was going to be the fully released version, like, you know, non-pre-release version, you know, actual, you know, I guess certified or whatever version they call it. But anyways, we can kind of just go through some of the major changes here. So this is the regular entities package. So one new feature that they added is the create menu. So like when you right click to create a new script, they have script templates for iComponent data, iSystem, iJob entity, and Baker types under assets create entities. So nice that we have some more script templates for there. You know, if you're already using Writer, then you do have some script templates available there, but nice to have these just right within the Unity editor here. Going into some of the kind of changes, so we have various performance improvements in baking, and it specifically calls out baking mesh-heavy scenes now takes 70% of what it did before. So nice solid improvement there. Significant performance improvements when creating archetypes and entity queries in worlds with a large number of existing archetypes and queries. So again, always good to see some kind of performance improvements there. Let's see. Entity query singleton methods now correctly handle cases where the query contains enableable components. So I guess if you created a query where it had some enableable components in there, it wouldn't always, get the exact singleton or singleton entity. However, get singleton entity and try get singleton entity cannot be used on queries with the enableable components, and that the singleton component itself cannot be enableable. So basically what that means is like, if you have an enableable component, you're trying to use that as like the singleton in your world, it actually won't work, which is something that I think would be helpful to have, so you don't have to like key off of another component or do some other weird kind of reference for that. But this does say that both constraints may be lifted in future release, so good to know that they're kind of considering that potential use case. By the way, check out the last week's episode of the Hot Path Show where Tobias showed us his super singleton system. Next up, the archetype window and entity profiler module UI initialization. I wanted to highlight this out because there were specifically, I noticed a bug with the archetype window where it just straight up did not load. Like if I open the archetype window, it would just be completely blank. And that was only in the 1.2.0-6 version. I checked on regular 1.0 and it worked just fine, but for some reason the archetype window didn't load. So again, haven't had a chance to test this out myself, but I'm hoping that that fixes that issue because the archetype window is nice to have sometimes. Next one, I increased the text and highlighted this because this is awesome. The entities hierarchy window would sometimes throw exceptions when entities are destroyed, and by sometimes this should mean all the time, every time, forever.
Sometimes.
So, this is awesome that this is fixed. Again, haven't tried it myself to, know that this is, stop spitting out insane errors for absolutely no reason. But this was driving me absolutely insane when every time I would exit play mode or, an entity would get destroyed that I had selected and I would just get completely spammed with errors. Even if it was on the collapse, the errors were slightly different, so they didn't all collapse together, and it was just a mess of errors. So, you don't want to have that much noise. That kind of noise is not awesome.
No. Yeah, that's the kind of noise.
So I see we got a lot of chat here. I'm just gonna go ahead and catch up real quick here. Sweet. So we can move over to the next thing. So entities graphics. Not a whole lot of stuff in here as far as changes go, but render mesh unmanaged is a new thing, which they added an unmanaged iComponent data using the new Unity Object Ref, which Danny is very much a fan of, I know, for big performance gains in baking, ! In the changelog on that one. And then further, it goes to say in deprecated things, the baking shared component of type render mesh is now obsolete in favor of the new render mesh unmanaged. So it sounds like they're kind of making a switch over to this render mesh unmanaged, which has major performance benefits, especially in baking.
So using the new Unity Object Ref, I guess they're referencing the mesh and materials through a different style or something. I don't know.
I believe so. Yeah. And it sounds like, this is now an unmanaged component, whereas I think this render mesh was just a managed component.
I shouldn't say. I don't remember exactly how it's turned. But The more unmanaged stuff, the better, because managed is slow, or well, usually slower. So yeah, these are
Looks like
all
these are
my
some of
changes.
Danny's changes.
Yay, can't they? Yeah.
We got Luke is a fan of render mesh unmanaged. I do like it. I like it. Render mesh unmanaged, does that mean we have a change in the way we can switch mesh and material of an entity at runtime? I do not know. It sounds like that this maybe only affects baking. But again, I haven't had a chance to play around with this myself. But because I know that is kind of a pain of like switching meshes and materials on an entity at runtime. Do you have to do that much in
Yeah.
your game at all?
Yes. I have a very strange situation where I have simulated chains, like there's pipes going on the weapons, which are simulated in like shake, like secondary physical animations, and I need to drive them through points that are simulated and send them over to the shader, which does the actual rendering, like the spline rendering, and because there's a variable amount of nodes in the chain, I can't use material overrides where you just put out
Change the
a few
color, change
floats.
the yeah.
Yeah, I need to have a variable amount of 3D points. So I do that with a structural buffer, which send over a bunch of floats to the GPU, and that I can't do through any of the dots versions. So I need to like find which material it is, make a copy out of it, and set a bunch of structural buffer data on it, and I need to go through a bunch of different annoying entity graphics APIs. Some of them I had to like do public instead of internal because they are so hidden. But just a thing here, I just looked up. Render mesh is like a struct, like a shared component, but it references mesh and material. The classes mesh and material. So obviously that's not
Right. The
burstable.
regular Unity
And
engine, yeah.
I presume the Unity, the what did they call it? Unity object ref is the thing that they use instead to be able to reference those assets with and still have it burstable. That would be my
Right.
guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, Luke says material mesh info works well for swapping meshes and materials at runtime. So if you're still using one of
Yeah,
the existing, yeah.
for swapping, it's probably a good idea. But it's still a lot of tricky things messing with the materials through dots because of how the dots, because how the managed and unmanaged thing doesn't really come together super nicely sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Danny does clarify that this is not for runtime, but he's going to find the samples of why it makes stuff easier. Sweet. So that was pretty much all I wanted to go over on Entity's graphics. And then I do just want to call out that netcode for Entities did receive an update as well. It's mostly performance related things. I don't think this is really going to change anything as far as my netcode for Entities tutorial, which I'm very thankful for. I'm probably just going to go ahead and try and upgrade the project to this 1.2.0-pre.12 version just to make sure everything still works, because might as well, because the project is still or the video hasn't been released yet, and if people go to install the latest version, then they might come across this one. So I just want to make sure that all works. And the physics version did receive an update as well. Again, these are mostly just kind of performance related things, nothing really too exciting or interesting as far as new features go in here. But yeah, new Unity ECS version. Exciting stuff.
New shiny stuff. Always fun.
What's a version of ECS is your project on again? Is it just kind of like the vanilla 1.0?
1.0.0.16? Could that be?
Yeah, I think 16 is the like if you look at the
But like maybe
1.0.16.
Oh yeah. I
Yeah,
suspected I might
extra
put
zero.
another zero, but I have like 50 significant modifications to it, so it's yeah, I'm stuck on that for a while, I think.
All right. Well, with that, we can move over into our instruction set where I'm going to be showcasing the DOTS combat system. So this is a combat system that I've used in a bunch of different projects. So I can go ahead and bring this up here and show you the little scene that I have here. So anyways, just to kind of give you just a little bit of a background on the combat system that I've used. By the way, I want to give a quick shout out to Luke Clemens, who's been in the chat. We kind of went back and forth in Discord a while back, and he kind of got me started about thinking about how to set up this combat system in kind of a data-oriented manner. And I think he kind of provided some good references to get me learning about things and just thinking about these problems in interesting ways. And I do think that it came together really well. The multiple times that I've had to implement this, I really enjoy working with it. It does require a lot of setup, as you'll see that there are like a lot of different scripts and components and systems that are all needed to get this to work. But everything is completely separate, so everything works kind of independently, and so this makes it really easy to just easily add and remove features. And once it's all set up, then your designers, you can really empower your designers to do some really cool stuff without adding any extra code and complexity in there. So I'm really happy with this system for many reasons. And so yeah, anyways, I can kind of show you what this little sample project that I got going on here is. So basically what I have here is we have just a little guy that we can move around, and then you can see that we just kind of have like a couple little target enemies around here for us to basically target. So anyways, the first thing that we want to do is actually go ahead and spawn some these capabilities, or what I call them. I call them capabilities because they can kind of do a bunch of different things. So, the first thing that we're going to be showcasing is that it can be used as like an attack, but we can also see that it could be used as maybe like a potion, or maybe you could power your player up. So it's really, there's really a lot of options that we can do for that sense. So anyways, it looks like I do already have it set up to where when I press the space bar, it's just going to go ahead and spawn one of these capabilities off into the world. And then I'm going to show you how we can kind of like build this up and do some cool things with it as we go. So to showcase kind of how I have this set up, so we have the player here, and scrolling down, so this again is the whole hit points. It's the exact same damage system that I went into 2 weeks ago. I didn't make any changes to this damage system. Everything completely builds off of this, and it all integrates with it, and I'll be showing you how that all works here. So again, I would recommend go checking out that video, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a prerequisite learning for this. So anyways, scrolling down, you see that I have this capability prefab authoring here. So all this really is just a prefab reference to this normal projectile prefab that we have here. And so we can click on this and just kind of see what this projectile prefab is here. You can see it's just a basic sphere mesh with a mesh renderer. It has a physics shape. Important thing is that the collision response is set to raise trigger events. I found that this works best for most of the attacks that I have done in my games, because if you use collide, then you start kind of fighting with the physics system a little bit, where maybe even if you do want some collisions to happen where things bounce off of other things, it's better in my experience, or it's easier in my experience to just kind of do that stuff manually, as opposed to using Unity's collision, and then again you having to fight with that when people are trying to move in different ways. I've found it easier to work with just by using trigger events rather than collision events. So anyways, you want to make sure it's set to raise trigger events, so we can basically listen for those trigger events in a system to actually trigger behavior in the game. You'll see that I have the collision filters here. Oops. Basically, we just have kind of different layers for the ground, raycasts, characters, and capabilities. So you can see that it belongs to the capability layer, and it collides with characters, just so we're just ignoring collisions with other things right now for the time being. And then we have this set to a kinematic physics body. And then the only thing that we have on here is this capability authoring. So I'll go ahead and open this capability authoring and basically show you what I have going here. You can see that I was typing in the quaternion lick rotation safe to get a little reference to that on there. So what this capability authoring is doing is it's just adding a couple of components onto here. So I'll get to this hit buffer element in a second, but so we're adding a casting entity, and this is something that I'm only going to be using later at the end of the this little presentation here. But you can use this. All this is just a reference to the entity that actually casted this capability. And that's so like you can, reference back if you ever need to like look at anything on the original entity or, give some power ups to that entity, which I'll be showing later. So the other thing that I'm adding is the entity team. So that way, whichever entity casted it, say if you are on the red team, we can add that entity team to it. And again, we can kind of like ignore friendly fire with that and make sure that we're only damaging people on the other team. So I'm actually assigning that entity team directly to the capability. Again, if we wanted, we could use this casting entity and kind of look back and see the team of the entity that casted it. But I think it's better to just have it on the actual entity itself. And I'm pretty sure that this enum value is just a single byte data, so it doesn't take up a lot of memory at all. Now, the important thing is this hit buffer element. So this is a dynamic buffer that I'm adding here. And so this dynamic buffer has 4 different variables in here. So you see that there is a public bool for is handled. The purpose of this is when we actually go through this hit buffer, I should probably explain what the purpose of the hit buffer is. So the hit buffer is anytime one of these capabilities actually collides with another entity, then it's going to add some data about that collision, or really a trigger, but I'm saying collision just because that's kind of, basically what we're doing is we're having 2 things collide together. So we can just kind of store some data about that collision event. So we're, storing some data about the entity that was hit. We're also looking at the position of the entity, and then we're looking, we can store a reference to the normal, so kind of like the angle between the, capability hitting a player. And the reason for that is we can implement some type of like knockback if we wanted to. So if we know that angle, then we know which direction that we can knock the different entities in. So that's kind of goes into what I was mentioning at the beginning about, adding in your own physics behavior. So it's kind of good to have that kind of normal, which essentially is just the direction between the two entities. And then finally, we have the public bool is handled. And the purpose of this is because this hit buffer is going to be continually populating with entities that it collides with. And we want to have this is handled in there to make sure that we're not, applying damage to something multiple times. So if we have, this trigger volume kind of passing through an entity, on each frame that capability is kind of overlapping that entity, we don't want to apply damage every single frame. We just want to apply damage one time. So it basically hits that hit buffer, and then the first frame we actually do all the interesting and important work on there, and then at the end of the frame we'll set the is handled to true, and then as it continues to pass through that, then we can check through our hit buffer just to make sure we're not applying things multiple times. So that's basically all that's set up on the entity right now. So now let's go ahead and make this capability move. So as you can imagine, if we just go over to our prefabs and we have this guy already selected, we can just add a component. And so I have a capability move speed authoring, and we can just pass in a move speed of 10. So I'll just give you a quick demonstration of what this looks like in practice. So you can see if we move over here, we can actually go ahead and fire this projectile off into the world. And then right now, we actually are not doing anything with like dealing damage or anything like that. But this just gives you kind of an idea about, we can just kind of add some type of data to this to make things happen. And then I have this guy just kind of firing things off right here, because eventually we're going to be taking damage as well. And I want to show a couple things off with that. So the way that this works, pretty basic stuff, but if we go to the capability components, you see that we have just a move to target. Nope, wrong one. That's later on. Capability move speed, which just has a value, and then there should just be a move forward. Anyways, it's just pretty basic stuff about it just moves the entity forward by that particular speed. You can check the source code on that if you really want to see that. So at this point, it's still kind of populating that hit buffer that I was just showing, but it's not really doing anything with it. So let me show you kind of how we're actually populating that buffer and detecting these collisions, or triggers rather, I should say. So I have this detect capability target system. So this is updating in the physics system group. Again, this is updating on the fixed time step. So it's not necessarily tied with the frame rate, but it's tied with a fixed time step. And then this is kind of the preferred place, I believe, to detect trigger events is after the physics simulation group has been completed, but still in the physics system group. So anyways, actually this is not even the right one that I want to look at. This is something later, but same thing applies. So detect capability trigger system. So yeah. Physics system group after physics simulation. So this is detect capability trigger. So all that's happening is inside the on update is we're just scheduling this detect capability trigger job, which is an iTrigger events job. The idea with these is, again, like we mentioned back in Unity, when I have this set to raise trigger events, anytime that that trigger volume overlaps another collider / rigid body, then one of these trigger events is going to be essentially raised. Now, this trigger event, from this, we don't get a whole lot of, exact information. So we do kind of need to like figure some things out on our own. So basically what we're doing here is we first need to figure out, which is the trigger entity and which is the hit entity. So, which one is the capability versus which one is the enemy character that we're trying to damage. So we can just do this by, looking at the components, because we know that our hit buffer, or the trigger entity is going to have a hit buffer on it. And we know that the entity being damaged is going to have a hit points type on there. So again, we can just do some quick lookups with these component lookups and buffer lookups to determine which one is which. If there is some case where a trigger event is raised and we don't have exactly one entity with a hit buffer and the other entity has the current hit points, then we'll just return out of here, because we don't necessarily care about that case in this particular trigger event detection job. So after that, we this is kind of what I was saying about we want to determine if the hit entity is already added to the trigger entity's hit buffer. So what we can do is just kind of search through this hit buffer, and we can see if the hit entity is equal to the entity at that position. So again, we're just iterating through the hit buffer that we've already populated, and we see if there's an entity that we've already targeted in there. If there is, then we'll just go ahead and return out of here, because we don't, again, want to add that entity twice in there. So next up, then, unfortunately with the trigger events, we don't get good information about the exact position of the, where the two entities are kind of like overlapping. With the collision events, we do, and I suppose that's just kind of like the difference between how triggers events or triggers work versus collisions. So we kind of have to do just a little bit of estimating. So basically all that I'm doing here is just looking at the central position of the trigger entity and the hit entity, and then just kind of getting the midpoint between those, and I'm calling that the hit position, and then just doing a little bit of math on the hit normal. And here I'm using that normalized safe.
Because they can be at the same point.
Technically they could, yeah.
So that's a good use.
Yeah, and then in that case, I don't care if the hit normal is just the identity, because that's fine if it's just at a 0 rotation for my use cases. So anyways, we just go ahead and populate this hit buffer element, we add a new element to the dynamic buffer, and you see that we just populate this with the is handled by default set to false. We pass in our hit entity, our hit position, and the hit normal. And then just go ahead and add that to the buffer. So now, again, we're populating this dynamic buffer. And at this point, basically you'll see what happens if we come back here and enter play mode. And then actually I'm going to disable this guy for just a moment. Nope, not the player, the enemy. Just so it'll be easier to find the capabilities that I spawn off. So when it passes through these 3 guys, we'll pause it and we'll come over here and we can select this, and then we can go down to our hit buffer. And then you can see that we actually have 4 entities listed in here. So one is the player, so it actually does collide with the player to begin with. So we do just always need to keep that in mind, that it is going to be colliding with our player when we spawn it from within inside the player. And then you see we have 3 other entries for the other 3 entities that this passed through, and it just keeps a reference to the position and normal of where that position or where that collision took place. Now you'll see that is handled is set to true, and that is because if we go over to that's an empty file. I moved it over to capability systems, and this last one that I have here. So I'm updating, I have this capability system group here that I've created, and basically everything that's kind of related to handling things related to the capability system is all going to happen within this system group here. And we can go into this and you'll see that this updates in the simulation system group. We'll update it after the fixed step transform or the fixed step simulation system group, as well as the transform system group. So we want to just make sure that these things both have been completed before we start doing any of our crazy capability stuff. So you'll see that this handle hit buffer system, I have this set to order last equal to true. Basically all this is doing is it's going through all these hit buffers, and it just sets is handled equal to true. So that way when we have our systems that we're going to get into just after this, again, those only run one time. So this is just, so basically what's going to happen is, for that first frame of that collision, is handled is set to false. Then we can run our extra logic about applying damage and everything like that. And then at the end of the frame, or the end of the group more specifically, we'll set that is handled to true, so that next frame comes around and we don't apply that again. Yeah. So anyways, we can, I'll just re-enable this guy here for now, and we'll come back to this prefab. So now let's actually go ahead and start dealing damage. So we have a damage on trigger authoring. So we can set the damage on trigger, we'll say set this to a value of 15. And then damage type, this is the exact same as from the previous one that I did on the damage, the previous showcase that I did on the damage system. So we can just set, say, physical damage for this, because I'm not doing anything special with damage types or anything like that. So now you'll see that when we go here, we can actually go ahead and deal damage to each of these entities as it passes through. So the way that this works is, let me see if there's actually anything interesting in the damage on trigger authoring. Nope, all we're doing is just adding this damage on trigger component. So you see the damage on trigger component again, just has the hit points and damage type that we're using. So now coming into our capability systems, we'll find the damage on trigger system. So you see what this does is we basically have nested for each loops here. So the first thing that we're doing is we're querying for anything with that dynamic buffer of the hit buffer elements. It also has that damage on trigger, which we just used, as well as the entity team, again, to set that in the damage buffer. So this kind of gets into some of the things that we did last week, but once we have the hit buffer, so we're looking through the entire hit buffer every frame. So again, when we kind of shoot that capability through the 3 entities, this hit buffer is going to be 4 elements long, 1 for the player, 1 for each of the 3 entities. And then here's where we just check, if hit.is handled, we just continue to the next one, because again, we only want to do this once. And then here is where we actually, add an element to our damage buffer. And this gets into the things that I was doing in the previous week, where we add to this damage buffer, and then we have a separate system that goes through that damage buffer, which actually applies the damage. So go reference that video if you want a little bit more information about what's going on that. But you can see it's really simple. We just make sure that, if the hit hasn't already been handled, just add a damage element there. So that's pretty easy to do. So next thing, we'll come back over here and let me get my notes and see what was the next thing that I wanted to show off here. Right, so the next thing is you'll see that, these capabilities, they basically just kind of go off into infinity and they just kind of, go forever. So we probably would want these to actually clean up at some point. So what we can do is just go ahead and add in a destroy on timer, and then we can set this to say a value of 5 seconds. And then, so now if we come back into play mode here, I'll just scoot back a little bit, go ahead and fire this off. And after 5 seconds, we should just see this capability disappear, and it does. And so this is, pretty basic stuff. It's not destroy on timer. It should be a destroy on timer system right here. So basically, yeah, as you can imagine, this is just decrementing the timer. Once the timer is less than 0, we just add the destroy entity tag to it. So this just kind of, showcases how we can easily add, new features to the different capabilities to, clean them up after some certain period of time. Where I think things start to get a little bit more relevant to, what we're doing with the combat system is if we come back to, we're on this guy here, we can add the destroy after hits authoring. So what this means is if we say set this to destroy after hits 1, that means that now, so you see if we shoot this off into the distance, you'll see that again it just gets cleaned up on time. But now if we shoot the entity, then it will destroy the first time that it hits an entity like this. And then if we go and say destroy after hits 2, then when we shoot this, it'll go through the first one and then hit the second one and get destroyed on the second one there. So the way that this works is destroy after hits. You can see that again, we're just iterating through everything with the hit buffer. We're looking through everything in the hit buffer. Again, we're just checking, if the hit has already been handled, just continue. We're making sure that we're ignoring any entity that's on the same team as us. Another way you could do this is to, see if the hit entity is equal to the casting entity. If you maybe still want this to be affected by friendly fire, and then you just set the destroy after hits, just decrement that by 1, and then if it is equal to or below 0, then we'll just add the destroy entity tag to that. So pretty easy stuff, but still kind of a nice flexibility thing for us to have there. So this is kind of looking, a little bit bland at this point. We just kind of have things disappearing. So we can do, maybe a little bit more fun things where we can actually say spawn a game object. We'll say spawn a game object on hit. So we'll add this to the capability. And then, so we have a game object here. under prefabs, which is the on hit effects. So what this is going to do is this now going to spawn some effects into our world anytime that the capability hits something. So you can see, you get a little sound effect here, and we just have a quick little particle system just kind of play. I don't know how well you can see that through the video, but you can see that, whenever we hit, it just, spawns that into the world. And so the way that this happens is we have spawn game object on hit, and as you can imagine, we go through the hit buffer. If it's already been handled, continue out of there. Again, we don't want to spawn this if it's on the same team. And then here we're actually using our spawn position. We're setting the spawn position equal to that hit position. So you can kind of see, I don't know how well you'll be able to see this here, but maybe if we zoom in on this a little bit here, that if we're kind of on this side, then the particle system kind of spawns on this side, whereas if we're on this side, the particle system kind of spawns on that side. Again, it's not super obvious at this type of scale, but again, we're just spawning it at the actual position that it hit, or the estimated position, I suppose I should say. And then also we can just get the spawn rotation by looking at our hit.normal, and I'm just doing a quaternion.euler on that. And then we just do a regular, unity object.instantiate, and we just have a reference to this spawn game objects on hit.value, which is, of course, is just a managed iComponent data where we're just storing that game object prefab. So we just, spawn that at the position and rotation. And then, of course, as you can imagine, this on hit effects is just a regular game object with a particle system, an audio source, and then I have a mono behavior to clean it up after 2 seconds. So
Makes sense.
Sweet. And then, so then now we can take this a little bit further, and let's go to our enemy prefab. And our enemies can kind of act the same way that our capabilities can, where we can add, a lot of these similar things to it. So we'll go ahead and say spawn game object on destroy, and we can go ahead and add the explosion effects on destroy effects is what it's called. Let's go ahead and add this to our player as well. So we'll go ahead and spawn game object on destroy and add the, almost did it again, on destroy effects right there. Nope. Got it. So now when we come over here, you see that when we hit, we just get the, small sound, small particle effects happening. And then, so this time is actually going to destroy them. And we get a bigger sound and a bigger explosion there. So now let's go over to here. You can see that when our player dies, explodes. But, the game is still kind of going on at this point. So typically in a game, when the player dies, we would want some kind of like event to happen. Maybe we go to like a game over screen, or the player respawns. But we probably typically want like some event thing to happen for specifically when the player dies. So luckily I've thought of that, and we can go ahead and add a it's a game over on destroy. So this just adds a game over on destroy tag here, and then when we actually go and destroy it, we can look at this tag to do some fun events. So we will come over here, we'll get destroyed by this guy here.
Of course.
So we can get the Dark Souls you died screen there. So the way that this works is, let's go to the destroy entity system. So you can see that, if the system API.has component game over on destroy, we'll go ahead and create this new game over entity and add a game over tag to it. So that's all it's doing, is it's just adding this new game over tag. And then of course we have a game over system, which has the require for update of the game over tag. And then all this does is it removes the game playing tag, and then also triggers this show game over UI, which is just a regular Unity UI feature. I should point out that when I remove this game playing tag, you can kind of see that we'll go over here. So this guy's just constantly shooting shots out into the world, but then when the player dies, it stops. And the purpose of that, the reason it does that is because the system that I have that has it constantly spawning these shots has a require for update of this game playing tag. So, you could have this in maybe like your input systems if you want the player to, stop, sending input commands after it's died. You can have like a game playing tag and just remove that when the player dies. So that's looking good there. Okay, so the next thing that we can showcase is, spawning other things in the game object or in the scene here. So we'll go back to our, actually we'll do this on the enemy. So we can also spawn entities when we destroy. So we have an explosion prefab here. So now we can go ahead and kill these, and you see that an actual explosion kind of spawns in place. And this is actually going to deal damage to me. So if I'm close enough... Nope. Why did it not go? Oh, I didn't add it to the prefab, that's why. So now if I'm close enough, you can see that it took away like half my health, and then... So yeah, now we can use the capability system to now like spawn new capabilities. So we can say go to this explosion prefab, and this explosion prefab has all sorts of things on here. We can see that this is applying 50 magic damage to us. It's going to destroy on the timer. It has that same thing. It has its on hit effects. If we want, we could say even add like a capability move speed, so we could like move this explosion. So what happens if we do this? Let's come over here. So you can see the explosion kind of moves, so you can kind of have those like different effects, or maybe the explosion grows or moves, because it's all built off of this same capability system. There are all these kind of basic building blocks which can all be interchanged and used with each other. So this is, where things start to get really fun, where you can really kind of empower your designers to do, all sorts of crazy things with this here. So other couple options that we could have is maybe come back to our normal projectile. Maybe we want to actually swap out the regular move system for a different one, where we're saying move to target. So let's set the move speed and radius to 10 on here. So you see now when we come back, the way that I have this set up is it's going to go forward into the world until it detects a close by entity. And then it'll actually go to that entity, and you see that it's glitching out. It's not actually cleaning those up right away. It's still cleaning them up after time, because I have destroy after hits set to 2. So if we just change that back to 1, now it should be destroy right away. And then same thing, these are going to be affecting us. So these guys are going to start chasing us now too.
Oof. Get good.
Get good. I know. So yeah, those are kind of like some of the main things that we can do. And also I just wanted to showcase that, we can also do things rather than, on trigger, like on collision, we can do things on use. So for example, we can go to this here and we'll say, heal on use authoring. So we'll say, heal ourselves by 10 hit points. So now if we come back over to here, we'll get damaged a couple times. Okay, I didn't die right there. So now whenever we actually cast this, you'll see that my health bar actually goes up now. I'm replenishing health because I have that heal on use tag set up on there. So just to give you a quick overview about how this heal on use works. So in our capability system, we have the heal on use system. And so all this does is So again, yeah, heal on use, and we're only looking at the casting entity. We don't need to like iterate through the buffer or anything. We're basically just doing this heal on use in the first frame, and the way that we do that is by doing the actual work, and then at the end we just remove the heal on use component, and that way the system no longer runs on that particular entity. Of course, we could use like maybe an enableable component if we wanted to here, and just like save on not having to do the structural change. But anyways, you can see that all we're doing is hooking into that damage system that I showcased in the previous episode of the Hot Path show, and then here we're setting the damage type to a damage type of healing, and then just setting the hit points and damage team on here. So again, hooks right into the damage system from last week or the week prior. And then I think that's pretty much most of what I wanted to showcase. I think the only other thing that I didn't specifically show off was how the move capability to target system works. So actually, this is kind of one of the interesting things that I use, for the capability system, and just kind of like ECS in general. I kind of have like multiple like systems kind of separated out into like multiple things that can kind of run one after the other sequentially. So this one here is the detect capability target system. So this is essentially going to run, earlier on in the frame, or this actually runs in the physics system group, to actually detect this, trigger between, or this overlap, I guess is what I'm using, between the targeting radius and other entities that we are potentially going to be targeting. So this section, all it does is it finds that target entity. Once we have the target entity, then we can move towards it in another system. So this is kind of the detection system. We have the collision filter, so we just are belonging to this raycast layer that I have set up, and then we're colliding with any characters. And then you can see inside the on update, what I'm doing here is I'm using the collision world, and I can do this overlap sphere. I have this at the transform.position, so this is running on the entity that's like trying to look for a target. So if we shoot a shot out into the world, it's running on that shot. So it's always going to be doing this overlap sphere origin from like the center of that entity, and then we're going to go out, search through that detection radius, which we've defined in the move to target component. You see that we have a move speed and detection radius here, as well as the actual target entity. So once we do that, we can just figure out which entity is actually the closest entity. And then once we have the closest entity, then we can actually just set the target entity on here. So again, this just detects that target entity exists. And then we actually have a move capability to target system. And then so what this does is it just runs now on that with the move to target. And then all we're doing here is we're just checking to see if the target entity is actually set, and we can do this by using the transform lookup.try get component. So basically, this is kind of like a way that I'm doing kind of like two things in one here, because we will need the transform of the target entity to figure out where it is. However, if this basically returns false, maybe if the entity is equal to entity.null, then this actually doesn't run here. So what's happening in this case is, if we do have that, target position, we can figure out the direction to the target and then use the quaternion dot look rotation safe, and then passing in that to target direction, and I have the math.up as my other vector. Yeah. So basically, this is just kind of like orienting the shot towards the target, and then we're just going to be moving it forward after that. So basically, if there's no target, it's just going to move forward. If there is a target, it's first going to rotate towards the target and then move forward, if that makes sense. So anyways, that is basically kind of the showcase that I have for the capability system here. I think it's a really fun system. Tobias, before we get into any questions and comments from the audience, do you have any questions or comments on this? Anything else that you might want to see?
Yeah, I have actually two things. I'm hearing myself. Is it something on your end or is it on my
I'm
end?
not hearing you double, so
Well, it's a little bit tricky to speak for myself. Let's
oh,
see if I can.
here, wait.
Oh yeah, that's much. No, I still hear myself. We hear him double. Is there
Oh,
something on
really?
my end? Uh,
Oh, I
uh,
know why.
I think you had stuff from your
Wait,
screen
hold
share.
on. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. There we go. Yeah, there we go. But
Okay, because I was
Tim
sharing my
probably.
screen audio because I wanted the the sweet Dark Souls effects to come through. So let
Yeah,
me share my
and
screen, but not share audio this time.
yes, because I want to point one thing out on in your code. Uh, so can you go to the place where you set is handled?
So yes,
Yes. So you see there your 3 lines of code which handles the is handled thing.
yes,
Yes. So I did the exact same thing you did until like half a year ago, maybe a year ago, which I found out there's another way of doing it in one line. I think it should be completely possible with dynamic buffer too. So if you take a new line before you declare the hit variable, before like right line 59, and you
this here.
do hit buffer I, and then you do try if there's a element at. No, okay, so as array, just do as array first. Oh, isn't that? Oh
It's
no, it's
hit
the
buffer.
whole
Yeah.
hit buffer. But try
Wait.
no
So are
no
you saying hit buffer dot element at
yeah, and
I?
then I, and then dot handled. So no equal dot handled is handled, and then true.
I knew there was another way to do this.
So element at returns a reference to it, not the copy.
Right.
Yeah. I discovered that one, and I'm like, oh, so much code on
I'm
my
glad you
for
caught
looking
that.
it
I'm
up.
glad you caught that because I was probably going to ask you about that later, anyways.
Yeah. And so that was just a small thing that I realized because I have the same picking out the element and then setting something and then pushing it back again. I had it all over the place before. Yeah. Oh, I can see somebody really having a like me. Yes.
Yeah, and let me bring back the code that I had previously. So I basically extracted out the hit from the hit buffer, set is handled equal to true, and then I had to set that back in the hit buffer.
Go to the definition of element at just so we can see what's going on there. Yeah. So ref, that's
Check
the
write
trick.
access, return bounds, ref unsafe utility, array elements as ref, t buffer header, get element pointer, m buffer index. Interesting.
Complex stuff, but the ref thing in the return t
Yeah.
in the declaration, the line 202.
Oh
That's
yeah.
that's that's the sweet thing. Yeah. All right.
Nice.
So yeah, I'm glad that the
I
more
get to
more than
reference the
more than
element.
me was stuck on the old one for a long while. When I discovered that, I was like, why didn't I realize that? But you learn, you live, you live, you learn. Maybe that's the way around. Another thing, which is more of a philosophical thing, which is you mentioned that this way of dealing with this was very like you had building blocks, and it's the first time you showed me this too, and I'm like, yeah, it's very neat building blocks thing, the way you unfolded all of the feature set and everything, and like for designing and for most games, that's a very very good way of dealing with it. I wanted to point out like a counterweight, and this is not wrong or right in any
No,
way, shape,
please.
or
I want to
form.
hear it.
It's
Yeah.
just a counterweight. So I have in just read instructions with all of the powerful weapons and a lot of enemies. I have a situation where I might hit like 50 enemies in the same frame with 50 different bullets, and all of these bullets hit distinct enemies, and they have like effects, damage, some other secondary thing that happens, and then like sound effects and all of that, and like bullet bullet hole decal, or like bullet hole things. All there's like a cascade of different things that happens with every hit. And I had similar, not at as good like building Lego wise as you had, but I have a similar situation. But I had just too much to be able to do it with entities. It just was just creating and destroying and keeping all of these data onto entities was causing too much of a hiccup to creating and destroying and doing structural changes.
Mm.
So my system is like not at all as flexible, but it's like no entities involved anywhere basically. And that's
Mm.
something that I plan to show off sometime, maybe in 2 3 4 weeks on this show,
Yeah, yeah, that'd be
like
awesome.
how I deal with the, because there's like entities makes it very easy to build on top of it, and it's like very very nicely integrated, obviously the whole ECS. But you can do this type of stuff less flexible but faster if you just do straight up arrays everywhere and nothing, because sometimes you don't care about like a entity that you can like address or something. You just care that there's data and just go through a buffer data, and it's just,
Right.
you don't need to have any individuality between data. You just like, oh, there's damage and there's more damage and there's damage and there's effects, and that's it. And that's so that's a counterbalanced like flexibility or performance. And this is still performance. This is
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
way
No,
more
the
than
performance is
most.
still, yeah,
Yeah,
great on here, but yeah, no, no, I totally get what you're saying, and I guess it kind of depends on like the type of game that you're making. Like this type of thing lends itself well towards games where maybe you have like really in-depth like skill upgrade trees and everything like that, where you can like, you know, as you level up, you can kind of like modify your weapons, and you can swap out between weapons on the fly,
yeah.
and continually be upgrading things and kind of like lead into that loop. I'll tell you, I think one thing that I want to do for a future episode probably won't be for quite a while, because I know we have a bunch of other topics that we want to get to before then. But I kind of want to show how this would be integrated with like an actual like skill tree, where you could like have some kind of like user interface to because most of the stuff that I'm showcasing here is like how to modify these things through the editor, which is great for developing and everything like that. But in a mature product, you would want this to actually be kind of exposed to the user in some sort of way, where maybe they can like purchase upgrades, and then that actually
Yeah.
like builds up these capabilities in the different ways. And just like how do we handle that, and manipulate the prefabs and everything. And there's a lot of kind of like interesting things that you need to consider when you get into that. So that's
Yeah.
again something that I would like to kind of tackle down the line. But yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense. Again, if you don't have like the need for that type of complexity of like adding these little things, and doing a bunch of fine manipulation and all that, that you just use like the raw memory arrays and everything.
I think there's a lot of people coming into dots who like think of like, oh, ECS is like a very nice fast system, and it is, but like for me, once I realized that a lot of the data that you're shoving around in a typical game don't need to be individually addressable, which is like one of the purposes of entities, right? So you can address a specific entity. If they don't need to be individually addressable and they live and die pretty quickly, then you're like, when you just see an example of how you can do it, yeah, I think it's like a sort of a flip in. So I hopefully we can have some few example of that one in the future, and like show off how it's like really just data and nothing else, just exactly what you need and no fluff around it, and it's like a C++ all over again or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would love to
Yeah.
check out what you got. Yeah, any other related things to maybe your combat system or anything like that, or should we get into some of the questions that we have?
No, a lot of the concepts and stuff are similar to how I did it. Like the piercing, like you have like hits counting down and then death and stuff. All of those stuff. I have also similar thing. I've solved it in a very similar way, and I just thought it was a solid. Just that's how it would look if I didn't have 4,000 enemies. Then I would probably be still on the entity solution and not be forced to do it without entity. So yeah, looks good.
Sweet. So yeah, if anyone does have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. Just things related to what we were talking about here today. So I do see
I
that you starred one here. This here, right? Yeah. So
Yeah.
physics system group after physics simulation, right place to detect collision with updated transform, I guess, like raycasting, collision detection, etc. Yeah, I'm pretty sure there is somewhere in the physics documentation that it specifically says to do collision detection and raycasting and stuff at that point, because that's basically after the physics system has ran, it knows which things are overlapping and which trigger events are firing for that frame. So if you're detecting it before that, then you're not going to get that data until the next frame, which is not ideal.
Yeah.
So let's see. Oh, and Wayne Games says there's also an after physics system group that I think is more clear. Makes sense.
Oh, yeah. I wonder if that's slightly new. I don't remember if yeah, I think that's wasn't in the first version I used,
Go
but
ahead and
probably.
just check this here. So after physics system group. And so yeah, so this is still in the physics system group, and it is after the physics simulation system group. So yeah, you can see that I have my things right in here. There's the detect capability and detect capability target system. So these two here. So yeah, I guess I could drop them in this after physics system group here. So this is doing just like displaying some collision and trigger events. So I think that's kind of some of the debugging stuff. So again, yeah, that makes sense because it's happening after those collision and trigger events have already been raised for that frame. Sweet. The more you know.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Daniel had something. Danny. Continue.
Might have to do an episode of dynamic mesh changes in the future. Maybe voxel flipbook animation. That sounds cool. I dig that. Let's see. Did Danny have something new here?
Yeah, it was. I didn't really understand what context I started. Maybe you can put it up.
Okay, I was just
Or maybe
getting
I'm
caught up here
skipping
and see if
forward
there
too
was
much
any
here.
other things here. So currently facing combat ability system and netcode for entities, and it brings new challenges with ghost limit of 256. I thought the thin client limit got increased to like 1,000, but you might not be on the latest version of that because I think it still is in like the 1.2 pre-release version. So maybe that is something worth investigating. Well, actually, the thing with thin clients, I guess, is they're all being simulated on your local machine. So your machine may or may not be able to handle that large number of thin clients. So yeah, Danny calling me out here. Instead of state entity query, use system API query builder with all hit buffer elements to array. Yeah, probably should.
I was a little bit unsure in what context he meant that, but I know what
I
he
think
means,
I remember it was this here because I have this hit buffer query because I'm doing state get entity query. And then he said no need to cache that entire operation. So I think what he's referring to is do this where it's query builder with all hit buffer element dot to entity. Wait, dot build dot to entity array. And then I think I can use the state dot world update allocator there.
So that gives
so then this gives
of
us
the entities.
Yeah, the array of entities. Yeah, this trigger entities.
Oh
here.
yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. So the query build there, I guess, is the main thing, which has some generated code that does this nice and dandy without you having your own variable, I guess.
Exactly. On the topic of the previous quaternion question, I think I finally managed to find a Stack Overflow answer that gives an arbitrary valid quaternion. Nice.
I don't know if there's a way that person could link that, but I will.
2 if statements, square roots, and lots of divisions, so it might end up being slower.
Oh, yeah, actually, maybe you can use.
Sounds like a typical Stack Overflow answer.
Yeah, and maybe you can use like intrinsic to say like this thing where my reference up will like never be the same basically as the forward vector. You know, the if statement is basically never hit. It's just, and maybe you can like use intrinsics to say like to the burst like this thing will like
Hint
basically never
unlikely.
be true. So the branch predictor can just like don't give a shit about it. Yeah, could be. I don't know. All right.
Okay. Oh, not talking about thin clients, but apparently Ghost that can be synced. Okay. Interesting. So yeah, I didn't see anywhere, at least last time that I was looking through the documentation, I didn't see anywhere that there was a specific limit on Ghost entities, but yeah, maybe there is. Let's see. I save all damage I do in my game to a parallel queue and then use that queue to do damage to entities using component lookup. Do you think that's an okay way to do it? Yeah, I do something very similar. That's kind of what I was showcased in the episode before last, where I talked about the damage system, where I have basically a damage buffer that you can add to in parallel, which is just basically the same thing. But using a buffer rather than a queue. So yeah, I do think it's a good solution because, it solves the problem of, if you're dealing multiple elements of damage in the same frame to one entity, you can account for all those. Questions mandatory on the showcase, or more general questions welcome. Feel free to ask anything if you have something specific and quick. We're kind of coming to the end of the show here. Danny also mentioned state.world update allocator will put the entity array in memory that's reused every other frame. Yeah, I think, Danny did show me this on the last one where we can use the state.world update allocator, which I know, I think I was talking to you, right? And you said, dude, I want to switch everything over to this world update allocator, but you're a month away from release. Is it?
Yeah,
is it worth it to go through and change everything?
Allocator.temp and like replace.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but that's unhinged thing to do.
Every time I use this, I feel like so good about myself. I'm just like, yeah.
Yes.
Cool. Well, we can go ahead and move on for the time being. We can go ahead and come to our kind of closing portion of the show where we bring up our dynamic allocation, which is the fun things that we have to share with the community here. So, Tobias, what do you got for your dynamic allocation for the week?
Yeah. So okay, now I'm getting lost in the sauce here. Where did I put my link? There. So let's see here if I can share my screen. My laptop is so slow right now for some reason. There we go. Present, share screen, and that one. So I guess we can post this in the chat. This one. No, wait a minute. What
You had a
happened?
specific blog, right? I have it in the show notes, I think, if you want me to pull that up.
Yeah, I managed to drag the wrong. Oh, there we go. Here we go. Are you putting it in, or should I? I found it.
I'll post it in the chat.
Yeah. So I talked about the noise functions, and like some of these are very much not relevant, not specific to. Most of these are not specific to dots or anything like that. It's just like built-in noise. And this is a very nice blog post where somebody goes through all of the noise functions that is built into Unity Mathematics. So you have like the C noise, you have S noise, and you have I think Perlin somewhere, cellular, F1, a bunch of them, and it just goes through them. And when you use noise, you often put in a float 2. That just literally means like you're sampling a 2D position from this texture, whatever, and you get out the 0 to 1 or 1 minus 1 to 1 value from that point. And think about using the thread index and the entity index and maybe some other random seed to like just shove this sample point somewhere into this texture, and then you have your seemingly random result. And it's like, yeah, it's just a very straightforward way to do random things, and specifically random things that maybe moves over time or something, so you can use time to do some sort of just scroll through this texture, and you can get like a temporal persistent type of randomized value fluctuation, if that makes sense. So
Yeah,
but
yeah,
look at
totally.
that blog. It's very, very good demonstration of all the different things that is available through noise in the mathematics library.
Yeah, and even just that blog in general has a lot of good references. It's kind of like an OG ECS blog, one of the ones from a long, long time ago.
Yeah, for sure. I think this was posted in the Unity Dots forum some like long time ago, and
Yeah, it was
I
written
just keep
October
looking it up
2018.
I keep looking it up every time I need it, maybe like once a month. Good
Yeah,
stuff.
like that's still like the old Unity editor interface and everything, where everything's all round. All like the buttons
Yeah,
are all kind of rounded and everything.
yeah. All right. Yeah, that was mine.
What's up, Aya? How's it going? So, my dynamic allocation of the week is a new book called Unresolved Forces. So, this is a new book by Richard Fabian, who is the guy who wrote the data oriented design book. So, he just came out with a brand new book the other day. It is, I'll post the link in chat here. It is available online to read completely for free. However, there is a paperback version you can get if you want. You can go ahead and get the links down at the bottom. I won't read this whole thing, but I'll just go ahead and read a quick little blurb at the top here. So it says, in almost every book on design patterns, from the famous Game of Four book to modern titles, whether about programming or not, the basic definition of a pattern has remained unchanged, unchallenged, and quite wrong. Whenever you see the claim, design patterns are common solutions to repeating problems, you know you have found another example of a misconception embedded in the minds of the vast majority. When you encounter a text claiming that design patterns are general or reusable solutions to common problems, you can be sure they won't have provided the information you need to use them in their most potent form. While validated by evidence of the damage design patterns caused, skeptics of patterns have remained powerless to correct the faults. More than 20 years later, the forces driving their decline persist, but general defeat remains unresolved. You can go ahead and read the rest here. But yeah, it seems like it would be an interesting read, kind of almost like a challenge about design patterns. I think I read somewhere in one of his blurbs that he was saying like, the definition of design patterns have remained unchanged, unchallenged, and wrong, and that they haven't really evolved too much in the decades since that. Specifically, he calls out the Gang of Four book, which I know a lot of people point to as like one of the kind of primary examples of showing these kind of design patterns that I think he mentioned somewhere that I think at the beginning of that book that it says that, you know, these design patterns should evolve over time, and they haven't really evolved too much. So yeah, I think it would be like kind of an interesting read to kind of, you know, go against some of the you know, design patterns that have kind of been out for a long time. And you know, he kind of did that. You know, a similar thing with his data-oriented design book, which was like, you know, an alternative to object-oriented programming. So, you know, I think that data-oriented design book was really great, and definitely has me interested in reading this new book called Unresolved Forces. So go ahead and check that out at unresolvedforces.com. Once again, you can read it online completely for free. You can say read it online. It has the entire book. I think it's like an almost 500-page book available to read for free. And yeah, exciting stuff.
All right, maybe that's something to dig into when my game is released.
Aya says, so true. Design patterns are wrong, and that's why I make spaghetti. I'm the victim here.
I think there's an old there's like a principal design engineer at Sony or something that has a very rally in quote like something in design patterns are as mediocre as the programmers who use them or something. A very spicy quote. There's some opinions about the design patterns that is taught in school.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, we can kind of go ahead and close out our show here. I think this is a very exciting show. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here today. We had a lot of good comments in the chat. I think everyone here, myself included, sounds like you and a bunch of people in the chat, we all learned some new things. We're all helping each other out, and you know, glad that Danny was in here showing us some cool things as well. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining us here today. Once again, thank you to our Patreon supporters over on Patreon. You can go ahead and check out patreon.com/TurboMakesGames for some very exciting and fun bonuses. And thank you to our supporters at the CPU register tier, which is the highest tier that we have. So thank you to eCool for your support over there. And yeah, so with that, we can go ahead and close our show out. Tobias, you got any closing words for us here?
No. Code on. That was cringe.
Code on. All right. With that, code on. See you later, everybody.
Bye.